Ladies and gentlemen, hey yo, fellas out there, we are here to talk about Thursday Night Football Week 11, and this is a very wonky slate. It should be a pretty interesting game. I mean, right now you have a trending Mac Jones, Bill Belichick in this team fighting for a playoff spot, fighting for a division maybe in the New England Patriots, so that's kind of fun. Atlanta coming off the Schneins, but they're in the NFC for the 7th seed being wide open right now, so we'll see what happens there. But it's a wonky slate because of some injuries, because of the pricing, and it's kind of fun to break down. And I think there's a lot of things that the public and people who don't watch this video are going to make massive mistakes, primarily speaking on the backfield of the Atlanta Falcons, because Cordell Patterson has this ankle injury. It's supposed to be an ankle sprain. He's doubtful to play. So that leaves us with Mike Davis and who featured in the Dallas Cowboys game, Wayne Gallman. But there's a lot to break down there thanks to the pricing here. So let's get into all that right now. The subscribe button pops up. We are very close to 45,000 subscribers. The goal is to get there by the end of the week. Double check. About 40% of people aren't subscribed, so just double check to make sure you are. And with that, let's transition now into the player-by-player breakdown. So the player-by-player breakdown is on the screen, and it will take us a little bit to get to that running back backfield, as we'll start with the highest salaried players, and I'll give you my interest, yes, maybe, or no. As always, we have a live stream at 6 p.m. East Coast time before the game starts on Thursday. That is where we will get our final thoughts, where the ownership comes in, my projections, and all that type of stuff. Now, I do currently have these projections out right now, but of course, there will be updates for that as time goes on. So we can start it up top now with Mr. Matt Ryan, who's been hot and cold. Last week was absolutely atrocious. 5.6 yards per attempt, a couple of picks, didn't even cross 120 passing yards. But to give him some of the benefit of the doubt, not a lot, he basically got pulled with like 5 minutes left in the third quarter. All of the starters did, which is important. Not a lot of people will remember that because this game was a massive blowout. So Matt Ryan played like 2.5 quarters for the most part. And yeah, he was throwing picks. He wasn't playing well. They got down so much that they pulled that man. But the week before, he looked great, right? Over 300 yards passing, hits the bonuses, scoring a lot of points, winning people slates. So far in the year, he's averaging 35 attempts per game and 260 passing yards per game, and he has over 18 fantasy points in half his games, 5 out of 10. So he's been a serviceable player. For Showdown slates, that's been pretty quality. He's my second highest projected player on the slate right now, so he does remain in play, and he is somebody that I would expect in like 20 maxes to get a good amount of. Now, if you're just building one specific lineup, 2 quarterback lineups, in my opinion, make sense, especially with the injuries on this slate and the lack of really secure pay-up options. Like, there's nobody in the $11,000 range. There's barely anybody on this slate that's actually going to be that viable, in my opinion, above $8,000. My highest projected player on this slate is the rookie Mac Jones, who, look, he's looking good. I have him projected for 18.5 points. It's nothing crazy. Like, this slate is likely going to be a low-scoring slate for DFS, which it kind of makes it interesting and fun because all of the ranges and really the mid-range is in play, but the mid-range is overpriced. There's nobody to pay up for, and then there are some value options, but none of them look that good, so it's kind of, you're just forcing bad plays into your lineup, which, I mean, Thursday Night Football, no better way to kind of define it than that. But you're going to have Mac Jones, and this is going to be a great matchup. I mean, he's facing the dead last pass rush in Atlanta, the bottom 5 secondary in Atlanta. This defensive line is absolutely terrible. Mac Jones only has 3 games over 16 fantasy points this year, but he's trending. In 2 out of his last 3 games, he's crossed that number with over 18 fantasy points. He is now a rookie who is learning this system, and he's playing very well, and he's not making mistakes, which is the big thing. He is my highest projected player on the slate. I would prefer him as of right now to Matt Ryan, but these guys are very, very close. Their price points are close. Their projections are within like a point of each other for me. So I do think that 2 quarterbacks lineups are fine this week. Now, the next man up is Kyle Pitts, and this is where we're expecting no Calvin Ridley still. He's doubtful for this game. I think he might already be ruled out. But Kyle Pitts is the interesting one because he's seen cornerbacks the last 3 weeks, and he's starting to struggle, right? You ended up having him see Stephon Gilmore, Marshawn Lattimore struggled in those matchups. He gets Trevion Diggs, who's not a lockdown quarterback for the Cowboys. If anything, he was blown coverages left and right. Even on his interception in that game for the Cowboys, he blew a coverage, right? If only Matt Ryan wasn't getting hit as he thrown, it would have been a 60-yard touchdown. But Kyle Pitts is getting these number 1 treatments because the only other guys on the team are Omedid Zaccheaus, Tajay Sharp, Russell Gage. They're not threats like Kyle Pitts is physically, especially downfield. So in 3 games now without Calvin Ridley, you're seeing him lead this team in targets by 6 over Cordell Patterson with 19, 9 catches for 135 yards in 3 games. I mean, that's not great, right? That's averaging 3 catches for 40 yards a game. The problem is he's seeing number 1 cornerback treatment, and now you're getting New England, who has a top 3 secondary, who maybe does not have the shutdown Stephon Gilmore anymore, but yeah, they have really solid cornerbacks and safeties. You're talking J.C. Jackson and all the other players out there. So yeah, Kyle Pitts at $9,600. He is like the clear guy out there, but he is kind of tied for like my 4th highest projected. It is tough to really get there at Kyle Pitts with overwhelming confidence. The ceiling looks good on him. Kyle Pitts for me early on is going to be a maybe because right now I do prefer the quarterbacks for not that much more. You get to Damian Harris, who missed last week with a concussion, listed as a non-participant in the Monday estimated report. I'm currently projecting Damian Harris out. If Damian Harris does play though, it really muddies the waters here. If Damian Harris plays, you can't play Ramondre Stevenson at $8,600. It makes it very difficult to play Damian Harris at $8,800 because you would expect after his standout performance performance last week from Ramondre Stevenson, who we can talk about him now, 20 carries, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, was heavily involved in the receiving game as well. Like, if you're going to be projecting in Damian Harris, hard to ever get there at that price point, and then hard to believe that there's not going to be more touches for Ramondre and a pretty clear backfield by committee. So if Damian Harris does indeed play and gets cleared, these running backs up top, at least the expensive guys for the Patriots, they start to become not in play for me, and now you're quickly getting to this bare range of the 7K range where it's just a bunch of overpriced players. So fingers crossed that we get Ramondre Stevenson and get him as a solid play if Damian Harris is indeed out. But he got the full role last week. He had 5 targets as well. 5 targets on just 9 routes run, so that's obviously he's not going to see a target rate of like 60% moving forward. But he fits this Pats scheme so very well. He's come a long way from his running back coach in the preseason saying that he needs to work on not just one thing, but every single thing he is bad at. Literally what the coach said was quoted on saying. And then in the preseason, he looks good. He gets inactivated for a couple games because he's fumbling left and right. He's one fumble away from that happening again to him, just being benched in the game. But at this point, he has a strong matchup against a bottom 5 run defense, a bottom 5 defensive line in Atlanta. So yes, go ahead and get yourselves, if there's not going to be a Damian Harris, Ramondre Stevenson for me projects out as a borderline top 3 projected player in the slate behind the quarterbacks, and that does look good because in this game script, where it's basically a pick 'em, like depending on where you look, one team might be a 1-point favorite, basically a pick 'em, the way that they want to play is run the damn ball. That's how they're built. That's how they're built right now. They zig when they zag. Teams are going more cover 2 safeties and in 2 high looks. And Bill Belichick said, yeah, let me get some pass catching tight ends and some big old linemen like Trent Brown and just run this motherfucking ball. Let me draft Ramondre Stevenson. It all makes sense. They're going to give him the ball if there's no Harris. Now we get to the part of the program where we have to have a discussion. Wayne Gallman on this slate right now is $8,400. Look, I'm confused. I am very, very confused. And if you picked him up on your fantasy teams, I'm even more confused for you. Cordell Patterson, the guy who's been the best player on this team this year, is questionable / likely doubtful with an ankle sprain. So you take Cordell Patterson out. Now, what is this backfield? It's Mike Davis and it's Wayne Gallman, who are basically, to me, the exact same guy. Journeyman running backs who have been solid in limited appearances and play well, but they're never like insanely efficient. You're going to get like 4 yards per touch, 3.5 yards per carry, which is what Gallman did last week. But we have to break this down. He has $8,400 this week. When you have an $8,400 running back, he's basically the same price as Ramondre Stevenson. You would expect that guy, he's like the workhorse running back on this team. If there's no Damian Harris, Ramondre is going to get the 20 carries he got last week, the 16 plus carries. You're not going to get that from Wayne Gallman. At least you can't project for that to happen. Is there a potential range of outcomes where it happens? Sure, but it's not likely. Now, why is this the case? But Sally had 15 carries last week against the Cowboys. Did you watch that game? Because when Cordell Patterson got hurt, he's not even playing Wayne Gallman for the most part. It's Mike Davis still in there as the starter, and then the starters get pulled in the third quarter. And you want to know what happens after that? The Falcons say, we're losing by 40. Let's get the fuck out of this game. Let's run. And that's what they did. They put Josh Rosen in. They ran the ball every single time. And then when Rosen throws, he's throwing 2 yards or he's throwing an interception in that game. And basically the entire fourth quarter, it was Wayne Gallman runs. Wayne Gallman got all of his work in garbage time, right? Garbage time when they pulled the starters, including Mike Davis. So what does that say? If they're pulling Mike Davis with the rest of the starters, they value him as the starter. So you get an $8,400 Wayne Gallman, who in this game is going to project out to be the backup running back and at best be in a backfield by committee with Mike Davis. I don't know how you can confidently play Wayne Gallman unless for some reason Mike Davis doesn't play in this game. Like Wayne Gallman, 15 touches last week on the ground, all in garbage time when they're down by 40. Right? Yes, he has a good matchup against New England this week, but what are we going to expect in this game? If Wayne Gallman gets 8 to 10 touches in this game, that would be really good usage, but he's $8,400. If this was a $4,000, $5,000 running back, we can start to consider it. But at $8,400, especially when he's priced next to Ramondre Stevenson, when he's priced right next to Jacoby Myers, the wide receiver 1 on the team who continues to see volume, I don't know how you confidently play Wayne Gallman. I have Wayne Gallman right now projecting out for like 9.2 fantasy points, and that might be a high number. That's like expecting him to see 10 touches in this game. I don't know how you play him at that point. 9.2 fantasy points from Wayne Gallman makes him the absolute stone worst play on the slate out of anybody currently above the price tag of like $5,000. And we're going to talk about that guy who's the worst play on the slate when we get there. And right now, Wayne Gallman is really difficult to want to get to. Now, before we keep going, I do want to talk about some players that I do have in the props market. Right now, it's a $200 prop. It's going to be a little bit of a spoiler alert, but not too much. Russell Gage over 8.5 fantasy points. Look, Russell Gage has been running a lot of routes. I know he goose-egged last week, but he only played 2.5 quarters before getting pulled. There's still no Ridley. Now there's no Cordell Patterson. Somebody's going to have to catch the ball. I expect Kyle Pitts to get that Bill Belichick focus your defense on him defense and take him out of the game, which leaves Russell Gage in the slot with probably the better or best matchup. So Russell Gage over 8.5 fantasy points. I have Russell Gage right now for about 10. Jacoby Myers over 10.5 fantasy points. I have him for 14 fantasy points. This is probably my favorite prop that I'm seeing right now. And the other one that is very close to being my favorite is the under on Olamide Zaccheaus. I know there's no Cordell Patterson, but right now he's only running as the wide receiver 3 when Cordell Patterson is in there. But right now Olamide Zaccheaus is running behind Kyle Pitts. He's running behind Russell Gage. He's running behind Tajay Sharp, so he's going to operate as like the fourth pass catcher in this offense. Omid Zaccheaus. He doesn't get used downfield. He doesn't separate. He doesn't have yards after the catch. So unless he just sees 4 or 5 targets and can have 7 and 8 yard catches, we're going to hit the under here, as I have him in the low 20s and high teens for overall points. So I take these 3 props. I put them together, a $200 prop to try and win. I don't even know what the profit is going to be on this if all 3 hit. It's a flex play. It's on Prize Picks. If you want to use the code SAL, simple S-A-L, simple as that, S-A-L sound, you'll get a free bet up to $100 on Prize Picks. So check it out down below. There's a bunch of other props on there for not just NFL, but a bunch of other sports. Check it all out. Take advantage of the free offer. SAL, F-R-E-E, free. Go get it. So unless I'm completely missing something here, unless I'm missing a report that Mike Davis is also hurt, which I'm not seeing, he got pulled in that game. Oh, he only saw 4 carries. Yeah, because they were getting blown out the entire time, and then he gets pulled. So Mike Davis in that game only got to play 2.5 quarters, right? We can scroll so you can start to see Mike Davis. This is the other thing. Like, Mike Davis is he's $2,600 cheaper at this point, which makes absolutely no sense than Wayne Gallman. I don't understand this. So Mike Davis is $2,600 cheaper. He only played 2.5 quarters in the last game. The entire game, they're getting blown out, so that's why he only had 4 carries. Then Wayne Gallman comes in and just gets garbage time because they want to leave. That's what happened. Many people are just going to look at the stats and say, Wayne Gallman was the number 1 running back in that game. Go get him. No, those people are absolutely not looking into the right things and just really being lazy. So Wayne Gallman, there's your scenario there. We can scroll now to some guys that I actually want to play, and this is the first player that I'm looking at on the slate. The quarterbacks are appropriately priced, but this is the first player that I'm looking at on the slate that I'm like, okay, there's actually some value here, right? Those New England running backs, if there's no Harris, Stevenson looks decent. Definitely not Wayne Gallman. There's actually some value here because Jacoby Myers at $8,000. He has not been getting a lot of routes run these last 2 weeks because the Patriots have just blown the doors off of teams in back-to-back weeks. They're looking really good, and they're just running the ball. They're establishing the shit out of that run, right? So a fairly priced Jacoby Myers here, who only has 8 targets over the last 2 games on 41 total routes because of the fact that they're blowing teams out. So if this one that is basically a coin flip spread stays a little closer, you start to get Mac Jones, instead of throwing 20 times, 25 times in the game, maybe it's 30, maybe it's 35, and Jacoby Myers starts to get back up to, instead of running 18 routes, 19 routes in a game, he's running 30. Instead of seeing 4 targets, he's seeing 7 or 8, which on the season so far, before these last 2 games of blowouts, he was averaging 7.6 targets per game. So Myers for me is a yes. Myers for me does indeed stand out as a captain option. He is my 3rd highest projected player right now, only behind the quarterbacks. So the quarterbacks are captain options. Myers is definitely a captain option. He looks like a sound and solid play. So if we keep going now we start to get to this range where Jacoby Myers was nicely priced, but the rest of this slate is just, honestly, like most of this mid-range and a lot of the rest of the slate is overpriced. Like, you're going to get Kendrick Bourne here, who's basically been a slot receiver for them, who, when they're not running that much, you're getting some targets for Jacoby Myers, some for Hunter Henry, some for Brandon Bolden, but Kendrick Bourne's not getting all that much usage. Now, last week he pops off, but on low usage, right? 4 targets, he catches all of them, 98 yards and a touchdown. So he gets the big touchdown in there. But on the season, he's averaging just 4 targets per game, only a 13% target share. This is a very steep price. This is a $7,600 receiver who is literally averaging 4 targets a game. He is the definition of touchdown or bust right now. Now, I do like him more than Wayne Gallman, but after that, I don't like him at all. So I'm going to put him on here as a no if you're playing one lineup. Now, keep this in mind. When I put a player on here as a no, that does not mean I'm getting 0% of them. That means if I'm building out one lineup, I do not think that he is an optimal play to put in that. If you're building out 5 to 10 to 150 lineups, yeah, 150 lineups, I'm probably going to get Kendrick Bourne because a good amount of the time, and it's probably low. I mean, it's probably like 10%, but that's higher than 0. He scores a touchdown in this game, and then he starts to become viable. So if you're playing in one lineup, that's kind of where the no comes from. Now, the next guy up is Hunter Henry, who is also expensive, but again, it's somewhat justified. Jonnu Smith missed the last game, right? And now he is going to be somewhat, we'll see, he's going to be questionable. I'm projecting Jonnu Smith out for this game. So Hunter Henry will operate as the main pass catching tight end. He basically has been all season. Look, he's just touchdown or bust. That's it. But the problem is he keeps scoring touchdowns. He has 7 touchdowns through 9 games so far. In the 3 games where he hasn't scored a touchdown this year, he's only scored 6, 6, and 4 fantasy points. So that's not good. He only has so far in 3 out of 9 games over 11 fantasy points this year. So even in the games where he's scoring touchdowns, he's struggling to get to double-digit fantasy points. So it's interesting here because he's $7,000 fucking dollars. Yeah, he had 2 touchdowns last week, but if Hunter Henry comes into this game and doesn't score a touchdown, he's not going to be in the winning lineup at $7,000. If he scores a touchdown, even then it's a question mark because in a half of his games this year, his touchdowns, he has 2 catches for 20 yards and a touchdown, 9 or 10 fantasy points. And if he's $5,000, that works out. If he's $6,000, that works out. At $7,000, it starts to become, okay, well, this might not work out for you still. So Hunter Henry, I'll put on here as a maybe, but just keep in mind, if this guy doesn't score a touchdown or maybe even 2, he's not going to be in winning lineups. He needs a touchdown at this point. Now we get to the man who I do like the over 8.5 fantasy points for in Russell Gage because I think that he's actually fairly priced here. $6,600 Russell Gage is going to operate as the clear number 1 receiver for this team if you count Kyle Pitts as a tight end. end. There's no Patterson. There's no Ridley. Now Kyle Pitts is going to get the number one treatment. I think that Russell Gage, he has not been playing well, of course. He just put up a goose egg last week, so I think it keeps people off of him. He only ran 18 routes, saw 3 targets, but keep in mind he only played 2.5 quarters before getting pulled. Not to mention his quarterback was under duress. His quarterback was playing terrible. He's had 7 catches on 11 targets for 64 yards in 3 games without Calvin Ridley. That's not good by any means, but now there's no Patterson, who's the second leading receiver on this team. You have the 2 leading receivers on this team now out for this game. I think it does bump up Russell Gage at 6,600. When you're looking at Hunter Henry, when you're looking at Kendrick Bourne and these guys around them, I think that Russell Gage actually comes in as a viable and a solid value. I'll put him on here as a yes right now. I think that there's some decent upside for him to have a 6 or 7 target game. Next up, we get to the man who should be operating as the running back 1A. Got pulled in that game. We talked a lot already about Mike Davis. Look, he only had 4 touches, but it was 2.5 quarters and they're getting blown out. So I'm not looking at that much. On the season, he's averaging 14.5 opportunities per game. Now he is averaging less than 50 yards per game on the year, and that's not great, but he's seeing 4 targets per game, and he's 5,800. So the price point is fair here. Like if I project out Mike Davis for 10.2 fantasy points, which I have right now on him, that literally projects him out as the best point per dollar play above $5,000 this week. So I'm not loving Mike Davis. I'm not going head over heels to get to him, but I'm going to put him on here as a yes because look, he is a fair price, and I think people are overreacting. DraftKings pricing is definitely overreacting unless I'm just completely swinging and missing something here. I don't think that I am by putting Wayne Gallman so much more than him. Before we start to get to the lower 5K range, we can talk about just the main contest right now on SuperDraft for this slate. So this is where I would start to go since we've talked about some of these players. I would start to go to Jacoby Myers in the captain spot. He's my second highest projected player behind his quarterback, who you also see on the screen for SuperDraft. It's a multiplier format. You get a free $25 if you want to use the code SAL, limited time offer. So check it out. It's the best spot to actually put your money if you're trying to build a bankroll and actually win. You have a 20 to 30% better edge because the contests only fill at 70 to 80%, a lot of them, especially if you're playing in the NBA. But even in the NFL still, they only fill that much because people just don't know about the site, but they guarantee that is the prize pool. So if it doesn't fill, they have to put the extra money in. You're facing less people for the same exact prize. That does not happen on any other site because the only way that they get the word out is basically like through me and I'm sure like 2 or 3 other content creators. So check it out. We've been partnered with them for 2 years. Very secure. SuperDraft.io. Free $25 if you use the code SAL. Jacoby Myers is my favorite captain option. Has a nice high multiplier of 1.8x, so he currently has the highest ceiling for me on SuperDraft. Mac Jones is a must play. He is my highest projected player, and for some reason, Matt Ryan has a 1x multiplier, meaning he only gets 1 times his fantasy points scored, meaning that they're expecting him to be like the best play in the slate. Mac Jones has a 1.45x multiplier, meaning he gets an additional 45% bonus on his fantasy points. That is way too good. I like Mac Jones a lot. Now, I put another guy on here as a spoiler alert, Brandon Bolden, because he has a high multiplier. If Damian Harris is active, this changes a little bit, but a really high multiplier on Brandon Bolden, a guy that we're about to talk about very shortly, and we can get back into that. So use the code SAL if you want to take advantage of that. Patriots defense definitely in play. They're expensive at 5,600, so in a single lineup, I probably lean to get away from them because I just prefer these value players, these position players. Mike Davis, who has upside to have 10 to 15 touches. Some of these guys below him. So Patriots defense, if you're playing 150, sure. If you're playing single entry and 3 max, I'll put them on there as a no. But we saw how bad Atlanta was last week and how bad and up and down Matt Ryan's been, so we can put them in here. Right now, it's just a maybe for 150s. Again, single lineup, 3 lineups, probably stay away from it. Olmedid Zaccheaus is massively overpriced. Now, he gets a bump up with no Cordell Patterson, but this is a guy who just struggles, right? He's not that athletic. He does not separate well. In 3 games without Ridley, he's had 6 catches, 92 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That 2-touchdown game is very fluky that he had 2 weeks ago. He's only averaging 15 routes per week with no Ridley. Now, with Cordell Patterson, by the way, not running a shit ton of routes per week, right? He's this gadgety player, sees some carries, runs some routes, and just gets high usage on those, high target rate, high touch rate when he's actually out there. But he's only running like 15 routes a week, right? 16 routes a week. So those routes are not going to be spread out that much to give so many guys boosts. It gives a little bit to Russell Gage. It gives a little bit to Zaccheaus. So if Zaccheaus runs 18 to 20 routes in this game, for a guy who struggles to separate, for a guy who struggles to have yards after the catch, his 2 to 3 targets in this game, they're not going to be that meaningful unless they're a touchdown. So Olmedid Zaccheaus needs a touchdown or he's busting. I only have him projected right now, Olmedid Zaccheaus, for like 6 fantasy points in this game. And right around that 6 fantasy point number is going to make him, he's right in that Wayne Gallman category in terms of point per dollar value of just being overpriced at $5,400. So he's definitely touchdown or bust. I'm going to put him on here as a no. Again, if you're playing more than one lineup or you want to take the risk, go for it. But numbers wise, he does not look good. This is an interesting play now. Nelson Agholor is a very interesting play. We know he has a lot of upside. The exact same analysis for Nelson Agholor as I said about Jacoby Myers. These guys aren't running a lot of routes lately. So Agholor only has 3 targets over the last 2 weeks. But that's because this New England team is just leading the other time. They're leading the other team by so much in these games that they don't have to run routes. They don't have to take deep shots. They're managing the game. But now they get a matchup against a bottom 5 secondary and the dead last ranked pass rush. Mac Jones is going to have time. If this game stays relatively close to where Mac Jones has to throw 30 times, now you get that 5 or 6 target game from Agholor. Agholor hasn't topped 65, 70 yards since week 1, but he has a couple of 60-yard games in there. You're really hoping for the touchdown at this point. $5,000 Nelson Agholor, I think, is actually a pretty strong value play this week. I have him for around 9 fantasy points. I like him as long as they can start throwing a little bit more. I think that he actually makes for a solid play this week relative to the rest of the slate. On most slates, a $5,000 player projecting out for like 8 or 9 points isn't great. On this slate, it is because most of the guys are overpriced. Brandon Bolden, we talked about liking his SuperDraft multiplier. Brandon Bolden looks solid. I mean, he continues to go out there and just put up fantasy points somehow on limited touches. He had 6 touches for 70 yards last week. J.J. Taylor had some carries, but Brandon Bolden is still the main guy getting the receiving game work. That is now 10 or more fantasy points in 3 out of his last 4 games. I think he's a solid play here. The last 2 games have also been terrible for him as well because he's mainly a pass-catching running back out there, and they're blowing teams out, so he's not getting as much usage. But he still got 3 targets last week. If the game stays close or if New England starts to trail in this game, that's where Brandon Bolden's usage starts to prop up a little bit. I do think that Brandon Bolden is in play. You should not expect a ton of touches here. Like, I think you're probably going to hover around 8 to 10 touches in most games, but for $4,800 for a guy who does catch passes, I think it definitely keeps him in play. Both the kickers are fine to get to. I prefer either one. A lot of people say, which one do you prefer the most? Well, obviously Nick Folk has a higher team total, but you never know how these games are going to play out in terms of what is the sharper team for going on it more on 4th downs. Atlanta's going to go for it more on 4th down, so that it might actually take away some upside from Young Hoku, where Bill Belichick seems to settle for field goals more often, so that helps Nick Folk. Things like that you have to think about. So probably lean to Nick Folk, but both are fine, especially if it gets you different by leaving the extra $400 on the table by Young Hoku. The final players on the slate now, we have a $3,600 Tajay Sharp, who I think is another good value play. Like, if you're looking at all these guys right now, I actually probably would prefer Tajay Sharp over the Nelson Aguilar, Brandon Bolden range. I have those guys projected for more, but point per dollar wise, leaving money on the table wise, look, Tajay Sharp is actually operating, believe it or not, these last couple of weeks as the wide receiver 2 in this offense. Like, you have Omedid Zaccheaus out there, and really he's running behind Tajay Sharp in this offense. So right now, Tajay Sharp is coming out here running 68 routes since Calvin Ridley has been out the last 3 weeks to Omedid Zaccheaus is only 48 routes. So he's operating as the clear wide receiver 2, 7 catches, 70 yards on 8 targets. Expect more usage now with Cordell Patterson out. Expect more usage now that he'll actually play a full game, we hope, in this one, where he only played 2.5 quarters in the last game. I think that Tajay Sharp is actually a solid play at $3,600. I'm expecting Sharp in this game to probably go out there and run somewhere around 25 to 30 routes, see somewhere as a veteran around 4 to 6 targets, and at $3,600, that's really good for a showdown slate. The Falcons defense for me actually doesn't project out that nicely, but as always, you saw the 49ers didn't project out that nicely. Touchdowns are always in play, so we'll just keep it on there, especially against a rookie, but that rookie does not make a lot of mistakes. So the Falcons defense, the defenses in general on the slate, I just prefer the kickers if you're choosing between the two. We start to get down a little bit more. Jonnu Smith, I'm projecting him out. He was listed as a limited participant on the Monday estimated report. This guy has 9 red zone targets in 9 games, which is good to see, but only 1 touchdown. And other than that, he's not really being used all that much. They're kind of using Brandon Bolden, definitely Hunter Henry ahead of him. So hasn't topped 2 catches since week 4. Now he's banged up with his shoulder. That's a concern. Hayden Hurst got hurt in the last game. He's listed as did not practice on Monday's estimated injury report. So another guy that if he's out only helps Russell Gage more in the middle of the field, would actually help Omedid Zaccheaus, helps Tajay Sharp. So track that. It's an ankle injury. I'm not sure how severe it is right now. He played 23 snaps before getting hurt in the last game. He's basically playing right now, depending on the week, 40 to 60% of the snaps. And he's pretty solid to get you like 4 to 6 fantasy points, but outside of that, he hasn't topped 7 fantasy points all season long. But at his current price tag, if he actually plays at $1,800 and gets you 5 or 6 fantasy points, that's not too bad. So if Hayden Hurst plays, I definitely think he's in play because value on a slate that doesn't have a ton of it. But if he's out, it helps just all those receivers. It actually makes Omedid look a little bit better as well. So next up, J.J. Taylor. He's $1,000 this week. You can't really get that excited about J.J. Taylor because even in a game script last week, which was like the best J.J. Taylor environment, you end up having him see 6 carries and not much usage. Brandon Bolden's going to get the passing game work. They showed us last week it's all Ramondre Stevenson. J.J. Taylor would have to get a goal line touchdown or something, which I don't know why you would have him in there, a smaller guy, much smaller, over Ramondre Stevenson. So even at $1,000, it just seems tough unless there's an injury to like Brandon Bolden for this to work out for Taylor. He probably won't even be active if Damian Harris is active. The rest of these guys are not in play. N'Keal Harry saw no work in week 9. He was not going to play in week 10 until the blowout, and then they basically just threw him a target. The backup quarterback's throwing him a target late in the game, Brian Hoyer. So he basically hasn't played in the last 2 games of meaningful football games. Maybe he runs a couple of routes. I'm not that interested. And these last 2 guys, they might get on the field, right? They might get on the field since Cordell Patterson is out now, but they're going to get on the field as the wide receiver 4 at best. Frank Darby, who I believe was a rookie last year, might have been a rookie this year. I can't even remember at this point. He has not played all year long. He ran 5 routes because it was a blowout against Dallas. Do not expect him to step on the field. Christian Blake has not played, I believe, since week 5, but he ended up playing because of the blowout, ran 7 routes, saw 0 catches on a target. So Christian Blake would operate as the wide receiver 4. If there was anybody who was going to see usage in this game because Cordell Patterson was out, that normally wouldn't, it's probably Christian Blake, but they already know that he stinks. He's not going to see that many routes. Again, Cordell Patterson is only averaging 17 routes run per game this year. So if you give, let's just say 4 more to Zaccheaus, you give 4 more to Tajay Sharp, you give 3 more or 4 more to Russell Gage, like you're left with like 5 more routes run, and maybe you give those to Christian Blake, and 5 routes run from Christian Blake probably leads to no targets and no receptions. So there's not much value. If you're looking for value under $2,000, you have to hope that Hayden Hurst plays. If he doesn't play, there's literally no value or guys that I really want to play until you get to Tajay Sharp at $3,600. So I mentioned at the top of the show that this is a slate that really lacks any strong pay-up options. So you're really not paying up too much. Only 2 guys above $10,000 with the quarterbacks. There's no real value options. The mid-range for the most part is overpriced. You have that nice cushion of maybe you like Nelson Aguilar, maybe you like Brandon Bolden, Tajay Sharp's there. So that's like kind of your value range for this slate. But then the mid-range is all overpriced. I think Russell Gage looks good. The kickers look okay. For the most part, though, this is going to be a very low-scoring slate because none of these guys are standout insane ceilings. Like the guys with the nice ceilings on the slate, somewhat Jacoby Myers, somewhat Ramondre Stevenson if there's no Harris, and somewhat Kyle Pitts, but I expect him to be that guy that they try and neutralize and take away. So that is where we are at right now. This is an interesting showdown slate to say the least. If you do want to play on SuperDraft, and again, another guy that I liked was Brandon Bolden. You need to fill in 2 more spots. In terms of my projections after that, like guys that stand out, highest projected guys after that, Ramondre Stevenson, Kyle Pitts, Russell Gage. The guys who have the best multipliers, though, would be Russell Gage to put in there to try and take advantage of that ceiling if he does indeed beat his projection. He will have the biggest benefit of it because of his multiplier. So you can use the code SALLY, get a free $25 upon sign up. If you put in 25, you can go take those props from earlier. So there's the sponsors of the program, Prize Picks and SuperDraft. Lovely communities, lovely overall companies over there. Support them, it supports the channel. And also you just get free dollar rooskies, right? Free bet up to $100 on Prize Picks, free $25 on SuperDraft. Check it all out. I appreciate you all a ton. The projections, the ownership, it's all up over on Patreon as you're reviewing this right now. Rankings, the optimizer, the Discord, all of that. If you want to come join the community of 1,000+ members right now, winning dollar rooskies and DFS and props and whatever it might be, come on in down below over on Patreon. We'll say, hey, we'll hug you when you walk into the Discord. When you come on in there, we'll say, welcome home. It's about damn time. Appreciate you tuning in. I'll see you when I see you again. I'll see you in the next one. We're going to be having a live stream at 6 p.m. East Coast time Thursday before this game starts. See you there.